My name is Margaret Coleman, and at 68 years old, I learned that the people who hold your hand at the funeral are sometimes the ones already counting your money. My grandson shoved me against my own kitchen counter hard enough to crack a rib. My granddaughter stood in the doorway filming it on her phone, laughing, telling me to sign the papers or get out. They thought a woman my age would just fold. They didn't know I'd spent 31 years as a county records clerk and that I notice things. I notice everything. And by the time they figured that out, it was already far too late for them. I want to tell you how it started, because it didn't start with a shove. It started with a casserole. It was the spring after my husband passed. Harold and I had been married 44 years, and when he died, the house outside Asheville got very quiet in a way I wasn't ready for. I kept setting 2 coffee cups out in the morning. I talked to him while I watered the ferns on the back porch. So when my daughter's children started coming around more, I told myself it was a blessing. I told myself a lot of things that spring. The first one to show up regularly was Tyler, my grandson, 26, and always smelling faintly of cologne he couldn't afford. He'd bring me a grocery store rotisserie chicken and call it dinner, and he'd sit at my table eating most of it himself while he talked. He had plans, always plans, a vending machine route, a crypto thing, a buddy who knew a guy in commercial real estate. I'd nod and pour him sweet tea and feel grateful just to have a voice in the house that wasn't the television. His sister came less often but watched more. Priya was 29, sharp where her brother was soft, and she had a way of walking through my home like an appraiser. She'd run her fingers along the banister Harold built and ask what year the house went up. She'd open the hall closet, the one with the good linens, and just look. I caught her once in Harold's study, standing at the file cabinet with her head tilted, reading the labels. When I cleared my throat, she smiled and said she was looking for tape. I want to be honest with you. I saw these things. A part of me filed them away even then, the way I'd filed 31 years of deeds and liens and probate notices down at the courthouse. But the rest of me, the lonely part, the grandmother part, talked over that quiet filing clerk in my head. Their family, I told her. They lost their grandfather too. The casserole came in May. My daughter, their mother, had moved to Phoenix for a man 2 years before, and we'd grown distant in the way that's nobody's fault and everybody's loss, so it surprised me when Priya showed up with a chicken and rice casserole and a folder. She set the dish on the counter, still warm, and the folder beside it, and she said, "Grandma, we've been worried about you out here all alone. Tyler and I want to help." The folder had my name on it. Inside were printouts, my property tax records. The deed to the house, free and clear, paid off the year Harold retired. A page from a bank I didn't even use anymore. And a 1-page document, very official looking, titled Durable Power of Attorney. "You shouldn't have to worry about bills and paperwork at your age," Priya said, in a voice like she was offering me a warm blanket. "Just sign this and Tyler and I will handle everything. You can finally relax." I remember looking at that casserole, the cheese still bubbling at the edges, and thinking how strange it was that betrayal could smell so much like comfort. I told her I'd think about it. I told her I needed to read things slowly now, that my eyes weren't what they were. That last part was a lie. My eyes are fine. But I'd learned a long time ago at the courthouse that "let me think about it" buys you time, and time is the one thing people who are rushing you don't want you to have. That night, I sat at Harold's desk with the folder and read every page twice. The power of attorney wasn't springing. It didn't kick in only if I became incompetent. It was effective immediately, the day I signed. It named both grandchildren as agents. And tucked into the financial powers was the authority to sell real property and transfer funds without a second signature. I'm not a lawyer, But I'd watched more than one family get gutted from the inside through papers exactly like these. I'd stamped the deeds afterward. I knew what the back end of this looked like, and it looked like an old woman in a rented room while strangers lived in the house her husband built. I did not sleep, but I did not cry either. Somewhere around 2 in the morning I got up, made myself a cup of chamomile, and started a list, not of feelings, of facts, account numbers, passwords I needed to change. The name of the lawyer Harold had used for the will, a man named Gus Faulkner, who I prayed was still breathing. I wrote down dates, when Tyler first mentioned money, when I caught Pryor in the study. I dated it all. A records clerk's instinct, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Have you ever felt that exact moment when someone you'd have died for shows you plain as day what you're actually worth to them? It doesn't feel like a knife, it feels like the floor going soft under your feet. If you know that feeling, stay with me, because it gets worse before it gets better, but I promise you it does get better. The next morning I called Gus Faulkner's office. He'd retired, but his daughter had taken over the practice, and when I said the name Harold Coleman, she got me an appointment for that Friday. Then I called my bank, the real one, the one Priya's printout didn't have, and asked them to flag my accounts. No transfers, no changes, no new signers without me coming in person with my ID. The young man on the phone asked if everything was all right. I said it was just good housekeeping. He said his own grandmother had been taken for $40,000 by a man she met at church, and I should trust my gut. I thanked him. I think about that boy still. I told the grandchildren I'd sign the papers the following week. I needed time to get my affairs in order, I said, and they liked that phrasing. It sounded like surrender. Tyler actually hugged me. Priya watched. That week things got strange in the house. I'd come back from the grocery store and find Harold's study door closed when I'd left it open. My checkbook moved from the second drawer to the third. One afternoon I found Tyler in the garage with the door pulled down, going through the boxes of Harold's papers I kept on the metal shelves. When I came in, he straightened up too fast and said he was looking for the title to the old truck, thought maybe he could sell it for me, take it off my hands. I told him the truck was Harold's and the truck was staying. He smiled and said, "Of course, Grandma," in a voice that had stopped reaching his eyes. I started keeping the things that mattered with me. The will, the deed, Harold's letters from when he was stationed in Germany, my mother's wedding ring. I put them in a zippered canvas bag, and the bag went in my car, in the spare tire well, and the car key never left my robe pocket. I changed every password to things they'd never guess, not birthdays, not anniversaries, but a line from a hymn Harold used to hum while he shaved. Friday I drove to see the lawyer. Her name was Dana Faulkner, and she had her father's habit of letting silence do the talking. I laid the folder on her desk. She read it without expression, then looked up and said the document was real and dangerous, and that if I'd signed it I'd have handed two 20-something kids the keys to everything I owned, effective the moment the ink dried. "You haven't signed it," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "No." "Good." She pulled a legal pad toward her. "Then we still have every move available to us. Let's make sure you keep it that way." Over the next 90 minutes, she walked me through what we'd do, quietly, before they ever knew. We'd revoke any authority they might claim, get a formal statement on record that I'd granted none. We'd put the house into a revocable living trust, with me as the only trustee and a successor I trusted completely. We'd document my mental competence with a doctor's letter, dated now, so that no one could ever stand in a courtroom and call me a confused old woman. And we'd set up alerts so that if anyone so much as breathed on my accounts, I'd know within the hour. "One more thing," Dana said as I gathered my coat. "Cases like this, the family always says the same thing afterward. We were only trying to help. Whatever happens, don't argue with that line. Just keep your records. Records don't get flustered. I drove home lighter than I'd felt in months. Not happy, but steady. Like a woman who'd found the railing on a dark staircase. It held for about a week. I'd made the appointment to sign for the following Tuesday, and on Monday night, Priya called to confirm, sweet as pie, asking if I'd had a chance to review the documents. I said I had, and that I had a few small concerns I wanted to go over with them in person. There was a pause on the line, a different kind of pause. Then she said, of course they'd come by tomorrow morning. They came at 9. Tyler had a friend with him, a heavy-set man he introduced as a notary, which told me everything. They brought the notary stamp before I'd agreed to anything. Priya carried the folder. She set it on the kitchen counter, exactly where the casserole had been, and slid a pen across the granite toward me. We figured we'd just knock it out today, she said. Save you a trip. I left the pen where it lay. I told them calmly that I'd decided not to sign a power of attorney, that I was perfectly capable of handling my own affairs, and that if they ever genuinely needed help with anything, my door was open the way it always had been. I said it kindly. I meant it kindly. Tyler's face changed first. The soft went out of it. You don't get it, he said. We're already in trouble, Grandma. Real trouble. I owe people. Priya co-signed. If you don't do this, we lose everything. I felt my heart break and harden in the same breath. I told him I was sorry he was in trouble, that I loved him, and that I would help him find real help. A financial counselor, a lawyer, a way through that didn't cost him his grandmother's house. But I would not sign that paper. That's when he crossed the kitchen and put both hands on my shoulders and shoved. I'm 68. I went back into the edge of the counter, and I heard something in my side give, a hot, bright crack, and the breath went out of me. I caught the lip of the sink. Priya didn't move to help me. She lifted her phone instead. I saw the little red dot. She was recording. Say it again, Grandma, she said, almost laughing. Say you're refusing to help your own family. She thought she was getting evidence I was cruel, a cold, withholding old woman starving out her struggling grandchildren. She thought a video like that might help them later, in some courtroom in her imagination. What she was actually doing was filming a felony. The notary friend had backed all the way to the door, hands up, saying he didn't sign up for this. He was leaving. He left. Tyler was breathing hard, looking at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. And I was bent over the counter, one arm wrapped around my ribs, and I did the only thing that mattered. I straightened up, looked right into Priya's little red dot, and I said, slow and clear, my grandson just struck me in my own home, and my granddaughter is filming it instead of stopping him. It is 9:40 in the morning. I am not signing anything. Then I told them to get out of my house. For a second, nobody moved. Then Priya lowered the phone and something flickered across her face that I'd later understand was the first crack in the story she'd been telling herself. The story where they were the desperate good guys and I was the obstacle. Tyler grabbed her arm and they left, the screen door banging twice behind them. I stood in my kitchen alone, holding my side, listening to their car peel out of the gravel. Then I picked up the landline, the one Harold insisted we keep, and I dialed 911. The dispatcher was a woman with a low, calm voice. I told her my grandson had assaulted me, and I thought a rib was broken. She kept me on the line until the deputies came. While I waited with my free hand, I opened the kitchen drawer and took out the little spiral notebook, and I wrote down the time, the words, the red dot, all of it, my handwriting shaky but legible. Records don't get flustered. 2 deputies arrived, then an ambulance. A young EMT taped my ribs and told me, gently, that I'd cracked at least one and bruised more, and that I should be proud of how clearly I was thinking. The deputy who took my statement was a woman about my daughter's age named Officer Reyes, and she wrote everything down and then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Mom, is there any documentation of what led up to this?" I told her there was. I told her about the folder, the power of attorney, the financial printouts they had no business owning, the password I'd caught Priya trying. I told her about the lawyer I'd already retained and the trust we were already setting up, and the dates I'd been keeping since May. I watched her pen slow down, then speed up. "Most people," she said quietly, "don't see it coming this clearly. I worked at the courthouse 31 years, I told her. I've seen the paperwork on the far side of stories like this. I just never thought I'd be the deed in the file. They took photographs of my ribs and the counter and the folder, which Priya had left behind in her hurry. And here is the part that mattered more than any of it. When Officer Reyes opened that folder to log it as evidence, she found, clipped to the back of the power of attorney, where I hadn't even looked, 3 other pages. 3 other power of attorney forms. Different names. An elderly man named Roy in the next county over. A widow named Cynthia. A third name I didn't recognize. My grandchildren had been carrying templates. They'd done this before or were about to other people's grandmothers. It wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was a pattern. The days after blurred together the way pain does. I stayed with my neighbor Eloisa for a week. Not because I was afraid to be in my house, but because Dana the lawyer wanted me somewhere with a witness while we moved fast. And we moved fast. The trust was finalized within days. The house, the accounts, Harold's pension survivor benefit, all of it slid into a structure that no signature of mine made under a kitchen counter threat could ever have touched, because I was the only one who controlled it, and I was demonstrably doctor certified, of perfectly sound mind. The criminal side moved slower, the way it always does. But it moved. Tyler was charged, assault and elder abuse, which in our state carries its own weight. When the detective ran the names on those extra forms, 2 of them were real people who'd been getting the same casserole treatment. The widow named Cynthia had already signed. She'd already lost $11,000. When her case and mine got laid side by side on a desk somewhere, my little dated notebook and my flagged accounts and my doctor's letter became the spine that held the whole thing upright. The clerk in me, the one I'd talked over all those lonely months, turned out to be the only one in the room who knew what she was doing. I'd be lying if I told you the hard part was the legal part. The hard part was Priya, because somewhere in week 3 my phone rang from a number I didn't know, and it was her, and she was crying. Not the performance from the kitchen. The real thing. The ugly, hiccuping kind I remembered from when she was small and skinned her knees. She said Tyler had been threatening her too, that she'd co-signed on debts she never understood, that he'd told her this was the only way, and that I was selfish and cold, and had always loved their mother more. She said she'd known, somewhere, that filming me was wrong, and that she'd watched the video back that night alone in her apartment and been sick. I want to tell you I was wise and warm in that moment. I wasn't, not entirely. I was a woman with a taped rib whose granddaughter had stood there laughing. I told her I couldn't have this conversation yet. I told her there were detectives involved now and that she needed her own lawyer, separate from her brother, today. And then, because I am still against everything, her grandmother, I told her one more thing. I told her that the door I promised was still open, but that walking through it would cost her the truth, all of it told to the people who needed to hear it. No more red dots. No more stories where she was the victim of a cruel old woman. There was a long silence, and then she said, "Okay, Grandma." Just that. The first true thing she'd said to me in a year. She got her own lawyer. She told the detectives the truth, including the parts that didn't flatter her, including the existence of the other forms, and where Tyler had gotten the templates. Her cooperation mattered. It wasn't redemption, not yet. Redemption isn't a phone call. It's the long, boring work that comes after. But it was a turning toward the light, and after the year I'd take a turning. Tyler took a plea in the end. He'll spend time where he can't shove anyone's grandmother into anyone's counter, and when he comes out, there's a long road of restitution to Cynthia and the others. I didn't go to the sentencing. I sat on Harold's back porch with the ferns and a cup of chamomile and let the afternoon go by. There's a kind of justice that doesn't need an audience. I did one more thing, and I think it's the thing Harold would have been proudest of. Cynthia, the widow who'd lost her 11,000, I found her. I drove to the next county with a casserole of my own, a real one, no folder, and I sat at her kitchen table and I told her she wasn't foolish and she wasn't alone, and I showed her how to flag her accounts and where to find a lawyer who wouldn't fleece her worse than the thieves had. She cried. I cried. Two old women at a formica table, putting a little of the world back together with our bare hands. That's how the senior centre thing started, though it sounds grander than it is. Once a month now I sit in the fellowship hall of the Methodist church down the road with whoever shows up, usually a dozen, mostly women, some men, and I tell them the unglamorous truth nobody tells you when you get old in this country, that the danger isn't always the stranger on the phone or the email from the fake prince. Sometimes it's the casserole. Sometimes it's the grandchild who hugs you and counts your rooms over your shoulder. I tell them to write things down, to keep their own names on their own accounts until the very end, to love their families fiercely and trust their own gut more fiercely still. I tell them, let me think about it, is a complete sentence. A man named Walt stood up at the last one, 80 if he was a day, hands shaking, and admitted his son-in-law had been helping with his savings, and that the helping had a funny way of leaving the account lighter every month. The room went still. I just nodded and said, then let's get you to a lawyer this week, and you could feel the whole room exhale. Not because I'm anything special, because he'd finally said it out loud, and the silence that had been suffocating him turned in an instant into something he could survive. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I hate them. The truth is more complicated than a yes or a no. I lost a grandson I helped raise, and that grief sits in me right alongside the relief. And they don't cancel each other out, they just both live there, like two pieces of furniture in the same room. But I am not bitter, and I am not afraid, and I am most certainly not a confused old woman who didn't know what she was doing. I knew exactly what I was doing. I'd known for 31 years. The strongest thing I ever did wasn't fighting back in that kitchen. It was the months before, when I was lonely and grieving and grateful for company, and some small stubborn clerk in the back of my mind kept right on writing down the dates anyway. She saved me, that clerk. The part of me that refused to look away even when looking away would have been so much warmer. So if you're watching this and you felt that floor go soft under your feet, if someone you love has started measuring you in dollars, I need you to hear me. You are not crazy. You are not cold for protecting what you built. And it is never ever too late to pick up a pen and start writing down the dates. I'm Margaret Coleman. I'm 68. My ribs healed crooked, and they ache when it rains. And every single morning I wake up in the house my husband built, in my own name, owing no one an apology for it. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me one thing you wrote down that nobody could ever take from you. The crack in my rib healed long before the crack in my heart did, and I've come to believe that's the right order of things. Bones knit fast because they have to. The rest of us take our time. When I look back at that spring, at the casserole and the folder and the little red dot on Priya's phone, I don't see bad luck. I see a chain of choices, link by link, each one pulling the next behind it. Tyler chose the easy lie over the hard truth, and the lie needed money, and the money needed my signature. And when I wouldn't give it, the only thing left was force. That's how it always goes. People don't fall into cruelty by accident. They walk their one small permission at a time. What saved me wasn't strength in that kitchen. I'm 68, and the young man twice my size put me into a counter. There was no winning that on muscle. What saved me was the quiet decision I'd made months earlier to keep my eyes open even when it hurt to look. I knew, somewhere under all that loneliness, that something was wrong, and I refused to talk myself out of knowing it. That clear-eyed honesty with myself was worth more than any lawyer. The lawyer came second. The truth came first. I think a lot now about what I'd want a younger person to take from this, and it isn't fear. Don't go through life suspecting the people who love you. That's no way to live, and Harold would have hated it. What I'd want them to carry is something steadier. Do right by people, even the ones who did you wrong, because your own decency is the one possession nobody can shove out of your hands. I helped Cynthia. I left a door open for Priya, not because they earned it, but because I refused to let what Tyler did decide who I get to be. And then use your head. Write the dates down. Read the paper twice. Keep your name on your own accounts until the very end, and let me think about it be a complete sentence. There is no shame in being careful. The shame belongs to the one holding the pen and the threat, never to the one who paused to think. The last thing, and maybe the hardest, is to keep going after the floor falls out from under you. I lost a grandson and gained a cracked rib and a story I never wanted, but I get up every morning in the house Harold built, in my own name, and I drive that casserole to the next frightened widow who thinks she's alone. Grief and purpose can share one body. They have in mine for 2 years now. You don't get over a thing like this. You get through it, one written down date at a time, and you find out you were stronger and clearer and kinder than the people who underestimated you ever dreamed. That, in the end, was the only fortune worth keeping.